Chapter 23 Change. The Impala cut through the quiet streets of Mystic Falls with the low, steady rumble of its engine. The trees lined along the sidewalks swayed gently in the light breeze, their green leaves filtering the sunlight that was not yet strong enough to truly warm the air. Elena rested her elbow on the window, her face tilted outward just enough to feel the wind brush against her skin. Her brown hair swayed softly with the breeze, while her expression seemed tranquil, almost peaceful, as if her thoughts, feelings, grief, and even the constant attempts to convince herself that everything was fine had all dissipated, carried away like leaves in the wind. To be honest, since the death of her parents, this was the first time she had felt genuinely happy, ever since Ryan's return, which had happened. For the first time, life seemed to have regained some meaning. The smile on her lips came far too easily, almost automatically, as if it required no effort at all. After everything she had been through, she was finally by the side of the love of her life. And in that moment, she felt complete, utterly fulfilled. Ryan noticed this out of the corner of his eye. "You're being very quiet. Any thoughts you'd like to share?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road, his tone as casual as ever. "No, I was just thinking about how happy I am by your side," Elena said in a low voice, "and I got a little scared that this might end suddenly." She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's scary when you realize you're so happy, but you can't fully enjoy it because you're afraid something will happen. I know it might not make much sense, but that's how I feel right now," she added, with a slight insecure smile. "So I stayed quiet, just trying to savor this moment. This happiness." Ryan slowed down a bit, his expression unchanged and remaining calm, but he took a deep breath before responding. "It makes sense." He glanced away from the road for a brief instant, just long enough to meet her eyes, ensuring she knew she was truly being heard. "When you lose something important, your brain learns to protect itself. It starts always expecting the worst, even when everything is finally going right." Elena turned her face toward him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "But let me tell you something." Ryan turned his eyes back to the road, his hand steady on the wheel. "This happiness you're feeling right now, it's not fragile. It's not a mistake by the universe. It exists because you exist." She felt a slight tightness in her chest. "I can't promise that nothing bad will happen," he continued, honest, without sugarcoating the truth. "No one can. But I can promise that I won't just disappear. That I'll be here. That if anyone tries to interfere with our happiness, they'll have to go through me first. So you don't have to live waiting for the end, Lena. At least, not with me. If this moment is good, then it deserves to be lived fully." Elena felt her eyes sting, but she smiled, a genuine smile, one that came from deep in her chest. "I love you, Ryan." A half smile appeared on Ryan's lips before he spoke. "I love you too, Elena." Elena smiled upon hearing his confession, leaning a little closer in her seat to intertwine her fingers with his over the gearshift. The Gilbert house appeared at the end of the street, exactly as it always had been, white, well-maintained, with a front garden too impeccable for a home where teenagers lived. Ryan slowed down and parked in front of the house, turning off the engine shortly after. For a moment, neither of them moved. Elena let out a soft sigh, opened the door, and then hesitated, turning back to him. "Give me a few minutes," she asked, with a crooked smile. "I need to change clothes. And let Jenna know I'm alive. I'll try not to run away in the meantime," Ryan replied, raising an eyebrow. She laughed, leaned in, and planted a quick, light kiss on the corner of his mouth, more affectionate than teasing. Then she got out of the car. Ryan watched her head toward the house. Her step was peculiar. A little shorter, a little too stiff, as if she were trying to convince her own body to cooperate. He sighed, leaned back in the seat, and crossed his arms behind his head, his gaze drifting to the rearview mirror, which now reflected only the clear sky and the treetops. That was when the thought returned. Once again, when she said, "I love you," something stirred in his heart. It wasn't pain, nor exactly pleasure. It was a tight, warm sensation, almost uncomfortable, hard to name, something he had never felt with certainty before. He had never been the type to take that kind of phrase seriously. So why, now, did he feel compelled to take it so seriously? It wasn't love, he was sure of that. What he felt for Elena didn't come from empathy or anything beautiful or profound like what people usually called feelings. It was different, simpler. She mattered, in a way no one had ever mattered before. The thought left him restless. Something was changing inside him, something he didn't fully understand yet. Ridiculous. He had never loved anyone in his previous life. Even though he had inherited the life of his predecessor in this world, he never thought that aspect would change. That was part of who he was, or, more precisely, what he lacked. Loving simply wasn't something possible for him. At least, that's what he had always believed. And yet, doubt now existed. At least part of him suspected that his predecessor's memories had influenced that strange, almost alien feeling now emerging toward Elena. Not that he considered it bad, exactly. Still, the idea of changing had never been part of his mindset. There was something deeply unsettling about accepting that he was transforming because of something so trivial, an insertion into this world decided by a strange roulette after his death. The mere notion that such fundamental feelings could be shaped by such arbitrary circumstances seemed, at the very least, unpleasant to him. It was as if he had been forced to change by something external, not by his own choice. Perhaps that was what truly bothered him, not the change itself, but the fact that it had occurred against his will. Still, that feeling wasn't bad. On the contrary, he realized, with some reluctance, that what he felt for Elena was much closer to genuine affection than anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. That alone was unprecedented, and even more disturbing was the quiet curiosity that arose alongside it. How far could this feeling go? For now, he believed he wouldn't mind killing for Elena, or protecting her, or staying by her side until the end of his own life. Strange thing, isn't it? A few minutes later, the front door of the Gilbert house opened again. Elena came down the steps with firmer strides now, her loose hair falling over her shoulders. She wore a simple yet elegant light blue dress, fitted just right to flatter her figure without excess. The hem ended just above her knees, and a light beige jacket was thrown over it, open, as if she hadn't spent much time thinking about the outfit. On her feet, she wore discreet flats, and her backpack hung from one shoulder. She opened the passenger door and got in the car, settling the backpack on her lap while carefully closing the door. Ryan gave her a quick glance, appraising her without hiding it. "You look beautiful." Elena blinked, surprised, and laughed lightly. "I didn't even get properly dressed. I just grabbed the first thing I saw in the closet." Ryan tilted his head slightly, clearly amused. "That only proves my point." He shrugged. "Even in a potato sack, you'd still look gorgeous." She let out a more open laugh, shaking her head. "You're impossible. And yet, here I am." He turned the key in the ignition, "Taking you to school." The Impala's engine roared back to life, and the car glided through the streets of Mystic Falls once more, heading toward the school. On the way, the conversation flowed naturally. They commented on classes, boring teachers, small gossips that inevitably circulated around town. At one point, Elena remembered something and turned to him. "Tyler mentioned yesterday at the grill about a party in the woods tonight." She raised an eyebrow. "From what he said, half the school is going." Ryan let out a brief laugh. "Of course they are." He glanced at her sideways. "Want to go with me?" "I was about to ask the same thing." She replied, smiling. "So, yes." "Great." He paused deliberately. "After the party, you can come over to my place." Elena didn't hesitate. "Well, I kind of promised, didn't I?" The two looked at each other, exchanging a gaze loaded with desire, like newlyweds eager to make the most of every moment of their own honeymoon. He held her hand, and she held his, as he continued driving toward the school. The Impala pulled into the school parking lot a few minutes later. The place was already crowded, students scattered in small groups, loud conversations, laughter, and curious glances that immediately turned to the black car as it parked. Ryan turned off the engine, got out first, and walked around the car, opening the door for Elena with a calm, almost automatic gesture. She took his hand as she stepped out, and for a moment, several eyes fixed on them. He noticed, of course, but he just smiled faintly, as if none of it mattered. Elena adjusted her backpack on her shoulder, and the two began walking side by side across the campus, their steps synchronized, talking softly to each other, oblivious to the whispers around them. To anyone watching from the outside, they looked like just another couple arriving at school. The campus buzz faded behind them as they approached the main building. The bell hadn't rung yet, but it was close enough to make the hallways too crowded and noisy. Elena instinctively slowed her pace a bit, adjusting her backpack on her shoulder, while Ryan walked beside her with his usual calm, as if the chaos around them simply didn't exist. They entered the classroom just seconds before the bell rang. Bonnie was already seated, leaning over her notebook, too distracted to notice the movement at the door right away. It was only when Elena pulled out the chair next to her that Bonnie looked up, and a smile appeared instantly. Finally, she glanced from Elena to Ryan, with that curious gleam in her eyes. I thought you guys weren't coming to class today. How could we not, Bonnie? We're studious students, okay. We wouldn't miss class just because of a hangover or not sleeping properly. Ryan replied casually, dropping his backpack beside the desk and sitting behind them. Bonnie raised an eyebrow upon hearing about not sleeping properly, clearly curious about what he meant, but she didn't press. By the way, good morning, Ryan added, turning to her. Bonnie held his gaze for a second longer than necessary before smiling again. Good morning, Ryan. From the other side of the room, Matt was already settled in his seat. When he noticed Ryan, he raised his hand in a quick, no-frills greeting. Hey, Ryan replied in the same tone, brief, neutral, effortless. The bell rang, cutting through the remaining conversations like a blade. Almost immediately, Professor Tanner entered the room with hurried steps, his usual serious expression, as if he were perpetually late for something more important than high school students. All right, everyone, he dropped some books on the desk without even looking at the class. Quiet. A few murmurs tried to linger, but Tanner's throat clearing was enough to finally silence the room. Welcome back. He wrote his name on the board with unnecessary force, United States history. And before anyone asks, yes, this will be on the test. Elena opened her notebook, the soft smile from earlier giving way to the attentive expression she always wore in class. Ryan simply opened his notebook and calmly looked at the professor, feeling Bonnie's gaze on him. The Battle of Willow Creek took place near the very end of the war, right here in Mystic Falls. Professor Tanner interrupted his own explanation, leaning both hands on the desk. How many casualties were there in that battle, Ms. Bennett? Bonnie, who had been leaning to the side, too distracted watching Ryan over her notebook, jumped slightly. She blinked twice, straightened in her chair, and answered on reflex. A lot, I'm not sure. Like, a lot. Some students smiled, others chuckled softly. Professor Tanner, however, didn't seem impressed in the least. Cuteness turns into stupidity in an instant, Miss Bennett. He sighed, already looking for another victim. Mr. Donovan, would you like to take this opportunity to shed the jock stereotype you carry? All eyes turned to Matt. He leaned back in his chair, a calm smile on his face. It's okay, Mr. Tanner, I don't mind. The class erupted in giggles, which only made the professor's jaw tighten further. Visibly frustrated, he scanned the front of the room until his gaze landed on Elena, who still wore a mood too light for that morning. Elena, Professor Tanner raised an eyebrow. Surely you can enlighten us about one of the most important historical events in this town. Elena frowned, confused. She quickly scanned her notes but found nothing helpful. She looked up, embarrassed. Sorry, I don't know. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. I was willing to be more lenient last year for obvious reasons, Elena. Tanner's voice hardened, but personal excuses ended with summer vacation. Elena felt her face heat up. Before the discomfort could grow into something worse, she felt Ryan's fingers intertwine with hers under the desk. The gesture was simple, but enough. The tension in her chest dissolved almost instantly, replaced by a quiet sense of security. She took a deep breath, nodding silently. Before Professor Tanner could continue, a voice rose from the other side of the room. There were 346 casualties. Unless you're counting local civilians. The murmur was immediate. Tanner turned, surprised. That's right, he studied the new student, Mr. Salvatore. Salvatore. Professor Tanner nodded. Any relation to the original settlers here in Mystic Falls? Distant. Stefan's response was short and direct. Very well. Tanner cleared his throat. Except, of course, there were no civilian casualties in this battle. Some students laughed, pleased with the public correction. Stefan, however, frowned. Actually, there were 27, sir. His voice remained calm. Confederate soldiers fired on the church, believing it was harboring weapons. They were wrong. It was a night of great loss. He paused briefly. The founders' archives are, kept in the public administration building, in case you'd like to check, Mr. Tanner. The professor fell silent for a second too long. The laughter that had spread through the room died down gradually, replaced by an awkward hush. Some students exchanged glances, others just lowered their heads, too pleased not to be the focus of that public humiliation. He cleared his throat, visibly unsettled. Yes, of course, thank you for the correction. Stefan merely nodded slightly. To him, it wasn't showing off, it was just an attempt to impress Elena. Elena, however, barely paid attention to it. Stefan noticed that. His gaze, which had instinctively sought Elena after answering, found her distant. It seemed his attempt to rescue her from the professor to get her attention had yielded no results. Professor Tanner cleared his throat and resumed the lesson, clearly eager to move on. As I was saying, he turned back to the board. The Battle of Willow Creek marked the end of a critical period for this town. Mystic Falls was built on sacrifices, losses, and his voice became background noise for most of the class. Bonnie, still intrigued, leaned slightly toward Elena and whispered, "Did you see that?" Elena looked up for a moment. "See what?" Bonnie blinked. "The new guy." Elena glanced quickly at Stefan, then shrugged. "Oh, yeah, he seems to know a lot about history." Bonnie frowned, confused, but before she could say anything, Ryan leaned forward a bit and said to both of them, "Local history tends to attract certain types." Bonnie shot him a quick look, as if wanting to ask what exactly he meant by that. But Ryan had already leaned back into his relaxed posture, his gaze drifting around the room again. After that, the class continued normally. Having history class 2 days in a row wasn't for everyone. Fortunately, this time it was just one period. Chapter 24: The Witch's Sight. The night fell over Mystic Falls quickly. The quiet streets gave way to silence punctuated by crickets and the distant sound of music echoing from the woods. Improvised lanterns illuminated the dirt path, cars parked haphazardly revealing a total lack of adult supervision. The bonfire was already lit when Ryan, Elena, and Bonnie arrived. The music came from a portable speaker propped up on the hood of a pickup truck, too bass-heavy for the quality of the equipment. Groups were scattered among tree trunks, rocks, and blankets thrown on the ground. Loud laughter, bottles passing from hand to hand. Bonnie accepted a cup from someone she didn't recognize, sniffed the contents, and made a face. "Definitely alcohol. Were you expecting tea?" Ryan commented, grabbing another cup and handing it to Elena. She smiled faintly, accepting it. "Thanks." They sat on a fallen log near the bonfire. The flames crackled high, casting orange light over the faces and creating long shadows that danced among the trees. The smell of burning wood mixed with cheap alcohol and damp grass. Bonnie took a small sip, made another face, and decided to hold the cup just out of politeness. "This is definitely going to make me regret it tomorrow." Ryan gave a half smile. "That's the idea, I guess." Elena laughed softly, leaning her shoulder against his almost without noticing. The gesture was automatic, too natural for someone who was thinking about it. Ryan, in turn, didn't pull away, he just tilted his head a little, as if that contact was expected. Bonnie watched the scene in silence for a few seconds. She observed the way Elena absent-mindedly played with Ryan's fingers while holding her cup. How he leaned slightly toward her when he spoke, even when he didn't need to. How the two of them seemed to exist in a small space of their own, isolated from the noise of the party around them. She drank her drink slowly. The two were really much closer than before. Had something happened between them the day before? Her instinct said, yes, especially remembering that Elena had spent the whole day walking strangely, which she thought was the reason they seemed so close. She had even asked what had happened, but her friend had limited herself to saying she had twisted her foot while going up the stairs the night before. The explanation, however, had been too false. From the way Elena spoke, it was clear it was a lie. After all, she had known her since childhood. It was hard not to notice when her friend wasn't being sincere. Still, she didn't have the feeling that Elena was lying out of malice. Maybe, she and Ryan had simply taken a step forward. Maybe, finally, they had gotten together. The idea made her chest tighten for an instant, though she knew it wasn't an absurd possibility. Elena, Caroline, and she herself had harbored feelings for Ryan since adolescence. Now, with his return, emotions that seemed dormant had resurfaced with force, hard to contain or ignore. On the last night when the four of them were together, it became clear that the three of them, in some way, had a chance with him. Ryan hadn't hidden it, and, although she didn't blame him, any teenager put in that situation where he could be with 3 girls at will would probably have reacted similarly. It still wasn't hard to imagine that he could get even closer to Elena, especially if she took the initiative. That thought, no matter how much she tried to push it away, insisted on lingering. But this wasn't the time to get lost in those thoughts. She had already decided that she would try, in her own way, to win her first love. Even if Ryan and Elena had taken a step forward, that didn't mean she had already lost. She would only lose the moment Ryan rejected her clearly or said he didn't want her. As for the idea of exclusivity, please, with Caroline and Elena involved, it was obvious that it wouldn't be simple, at least at first. Still, she wouldn't give up on having him all to herself. And that didn't mean she had to give up what she wanted just because of the circumstances. Ryan was worth it, since she had made that decision, the night before at the grill, to be bolder. She had been seriously reflecting on it. And, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wouldn't back down. That's why she narrowed her eyes and decided to test the waters. You two, Bonnie began, in a tone too casual to be innocent, are acting weird. Elena lifted her face, confused. Weird how? Like, Bonnie made a vague gesture with her hand, pointing at the two of them. Married. Like, newlyweds. Ryan arched an eyebrow. Is that a compliment or a criticism? An observation. Bonnie gave a half smile. You seem too close. Elena felt her face heat up slightly. We're not glued together. Bonnie tilted her head, looking directly at her hand, still intertwined with Ryan's. Of course not. Ryan let out a brief laugh through his nose. If it helps, we haven't signed any papers. He commented, calmly, yet. Elena turned her face to him immediately. Ryan. What? He shrugged. It was a joke. Bonnie laughed, finally taking another sip. You two are impossible. She shook her head, but the smile was genuine. And kind of nauseating. Hey, Elena protested, still smiling, while improvising an explanation. You asked. And, just so you know, friends can hold hands too, okay? Then she continued, in a tone too light for someone who clearly cared about the other's reactions. You know Ryan and I have always been really close. I'm just happy we're talking again. This is an old habit. As she said this, Elena raised the hand that was still holding Ryan's, who was arching an eyebrow as he listened to her explanation, surprised that she wasn't admitting their relationship, maybe. Then, she released his hand carefully, giving him a brief and subtly apologetic look. She didn't want her friends to know about the relationship, at least not yet. She knew very well that both had feelings for her boyfriend, and that wasn't an easy truth to expose. Bonnie held Elena's gaze for a few seconds too long to be comfortable. The smile was still there, but there was something more behind it, understanding, and a slight, well-hidden disappointment. All right, she said, finally, shrugging. If you say so. The relief was too immediate to go unnoticed. Elena relaxed her shoulders and let out her breath slowly, as if she had been holding it without noticing. She took the opportunity to change the subject before the silence became dangerous. Ah, she began, turning a little more toward Ryan, in an apparently casual tone. Bonnie was telling me some things yesterday. About her grandmother. Ryan shifted his gaze from the bonfire to her almost instantly. Weird how? He asked, too interested for someone who didn't care. Bonnie arched an eyebrow. I knew this would come up eventually. Elena smiled, encouragingly. She said your grandmother thought you were a medium. Ryan didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke. He didn't seem skeptical. On the contrary, he leaned forward a bit, resting his forearms on his knees. How so? Bonnie blinked, surprised by the reaction. She said it with a lot of conviction. She replied, she talked about our family coming from an ancient lineage. Witches from Salem. Ryan tilted his head, thoughtful. And do you believe that? Bonnie hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. I mean, I grew up hearing these stories. I always thought it was just family tradition. But I predicted Obama, I predicted Heath Ledger, and I still think Florida is going to break off and turn into little resort islands. In short, what I told Elena earlier, I might really be some kind of medium. Ryan stayed silent for a second, assessing. If it were real, he continued, interested, what could you do? Bonnie frowned. How so? Like, he chose his words carefully. Could you sense people, see places? Is that something a medium would be capable of or not? Elena realized immediately where this was going. Ryan, she murmured, but didn't stop him. Ryan turned his gaze back to Bonnie. For example, my parents are in Japan. He said calmly. If you had some kind of sensitivity, what would you see? Bonnie opened her mouth to respond and closed it again. This is ridiculous, she said, laughing nervously. I don't have powers. Let's assume you have psychic powers. Ryan insisted, now with a slight calm smile. What would you need? Bonnie thought for a moment. Grandma said she needed a personal object. She replied, or to touch the person. Ryan said nothing, he just extended his hand. For a second, Bonnie stayed still, staring at his fingers as if they were something dangerous. Elena felt her heart race. Ryan, just a second, he said, softly, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Bonnie took a deep breath. Okay, Grandma said I needed to concentrate. She murmured, more to herself than to them. Then she touched his hand. The world changed. The smile vanished from Bonnie's face in the same instant. The color drained from her skin, her eyes widened slightly. Her breathing faltered. She saw a plane cutting through the sky. The distant sound of engines. The infinite blue of the ocean below. Then, silence, land, gravestones, a cemetery. Bonnie pulled her hand back as if she had touched something burning. This is weird. The moment I touched you, I saw a plane. The infinite blue of the sky. A cemetery. I'm drunk. It's the drink. There's nothing psychic about this. She laughed, forcing lightness. Seriously. It's just cheap alcohol mixed with imagination. She stood up at once. I'm going to get another drink. To confirm. Really? Ryan murmured, more to himself than to the girl. He frowned slightly, aware that what Bonnie had seen could be more serious than it seemed. After all, she was a real witch. Still, what exactly did that vision mean? If he had to guess, he'd say it pointed to bad news involving his predecessor's parents. Maybe they were about to return to Mystic Falls, and end up dying. Bonnie had mentioned a cemetery, after all. Not that this was really his problem. Although he carried the memories of the predecessor related to those parents, they weren't, in fact, his. The emotional connection was weak, almost non-existent, stranger than anything else. Expecting him to genuinely care about it sounded, at the very least, absurd. In fact, he had only arrived at this line of reasoning for a simple reason: his mind worked too fast to ignore obvious possibilities. Blame his absurd genius, he concluded, with a touch of silent irony. While thinking about this, Bonnie disappeared among the people before anyone could stop her. For a few seconds, only the sound of the bonfire filled the space between them. Ryan stood up slowly. I'm going to check on her, he said to Elena, if that's okay. Elena nodded, still processing. Everything had been really weird. It's fine, she replied calmly. But, bring me another drink too. He smiled faintly, that calm smile that hid too many thoughts. Sure. Ryan walked away, leaving Elena alone on the log, staring at the dancing flames. Elena remained seated for a few moments, watching the flames rise and dissolve into sparks that disappeared into the dark air. The heat of the bonfire contrasted with the slight shiver that still ran over her skin since the conversation with Bonnie. There was something unsettling about that vision, even if her friend insisted on treating it all as the effect of alcohol. She brought the cup to her lips, taking a sip too small to really taste it. That's when she noticed someone approaching. Elena raised her gaze almost by reflex and met his. Stefan Salvatore stopped a few steps away, hands in his jacket pockets. The light from the bonfire reached part of his face, highlighting an expression too serious for that kind of party. Hi, he said, his voice calm, polite. Can I? Elena blinked once, surprised just enough not to seem rude. Oh, hi. She straightened her posture on the log. Sure. Stefan approached a little more, keeping a respectful distance before sitting on the other end of the log, without invading her space. Are you okay? He asked. In class earlier, Professor Tanner was harsh. Elena let out a faint smile. I'm fine, it wasn't a big deal. She shrugged. He always finds someone to pick on. Stefan nodded, as if he had known that for a long time. Even so, he hesitated for an instant. I thought it was unfair. Elena tilted her head, analyzing him with discreet curiosity. Stefan didn't have the flashy way of most people trying to start a conversation. He didn't seem nervous exactly. She held his gaze for a few more seconds before speaking. Well, was that unfairness what made you act that way? Thanks, you fortunately saved me from being even more judged by Professor Tanner. Stefan seemed slightly surprised by the thanks, but responded with a brief nod. It was nothing, I like answering my teacher's questions. He said, I'm Stefan Salvatore. Elena, she replied immediately, Elena Gilbert. I know, The words slipped out before he could stop them. Stefan cleared his throat lightly. I mean, everyone knows you around here. Elena smiled politely, without correcting, without showing additional curiosity. You moved here recently, didn't you? She asked, just to keep the conversation going. A little while ago, Stefan confirmed. I'm still trying to figure out how things work around here. Good luck with that, she commented, in a light tone. Mystic Falls seems simple, but it likes to surprise. Stefan sketched a small, genuine smile. I've gotten that impression. There was a brief pause. The music in the background changed, someone laughed too loudly near the pickup truck, and the crackle of the bonfire filled the silence that settled between them. Stefan tried to start a conversation again. Do you usually come to this kind of party? He asked. Not much, Elena replied, without lying. Today was more someone else's insistence. Friends, he ventured. Something like that, she said, without elaborating. Stefan nodded, but the conversation clearly wasn't taking off. Elena maintained a polite but distant posture. Her answers were short, correct, without openings. There was no hostility, just a lack of interest. He noticed. After a few seconds in silence, Stefan took a deep breath and stood up slowly. Well, he began, adjusting his jacket. I just remembered I have something to take care of. I promised to help someone. Sure, Elena replied immediately. Good night. Good night, Elena, he said, with one last discreet smile. Stefan walked away among the shadows of the trees, disappearing quickly into the movement of the party. Elena turned her gaze back to the bonfire, letting out her breath slowly. That was weird. She brought the cup to her lips again, watching the flames dance, while waiting for Ryan to return. Hey, everyone. I wanted to do the entire forest party in just one chapter, but it would exceed 5,000 words, so I decided to split it into two to keep it from being too tiring. In the next one, Ryan will show his side of the King of Curses since there's Damon's attack on Vicky. What do you think? Should he kill Damon or should Stefan stop him, saving him? Ryan is kind of sadistic and loves to torment those who are his victims. Anyway, I hope you like these chapters, since it's basically the beginning of the drama, about Ryan's parents, and it's one of the mysteries of the upcoming chapters. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 25. This is going to be our secret. Ryan found Bonnie near the pickup truck, where the portable speaker struggled uselessly to assert itself over the overlapping laughter and conversations. Someone had turned up the volume, as if that would fix the dubious bass quality, and two girls danced awkwardly near the tailgate, spilling drinks on the ground without a care. Bonnie had her back to him, leaning over an improvised cooler, rummaging through bottles and plastic cups. You shouldn't mix different things, Ryan commented as he approached. Bonnie startled slightly and turned her face, surprised for half a second before relaxing. Are you following me now? She asked, with a smile that didn't match the playful tone. Just making sure you don't end up getting sick. He extended his hand when she pulled out a bottle. And also because they promised me a drink. Bonnie laughed, handing him the bottle before grabbing another. Fair enough. She filled 2 cups with questionable precision and pushed one toward him. This one's for you, and this, she raised the other cup, observing the liquid against the firelight, is for me. To prove I haven't gone crazy. Ryan accepted the cup but didn't drink right away. Instead, he watched Bonnie for a few seconds longer than necessary. What exactly should he say to her at that moment? Tell the truth, admit that she was, in fact, a witch? Or would it be better to let her discover it on her own, little by little? On second thought, maybe the first option was better. He could reveal a bit of his own powers and make her believe that he was also some kind of witch. That way, his identity would be more stable, and the origin of his abilities could easily be attributed to magic. If necessary, he could just say he was a jujutsu sorcerer, a practitioner of a magical branch created in Japan. That way, the two of them would have something in common, something that connected them uniquely. From there, getting closer to her would be simpler, and, in time, having her by his side as his woman seemed like a natural outcome. As for Elena, he believed she would probably accept it. Her difficulty in dealing with his sexual libido was becoming increasingly evident, and besides, she wouldn't stand to see her best friends suffer. There was the risk of Bonnie and Caroline distancing themselves from her because of him, since both had clear feelings for Ryan, something Elena couldn't ignore. Her overly kind nature, combined with the emotional dependence she had on the people around her, would end up leading her to accept the idea of sharing him with other women. After all, after that night the three of them had spent with him, it no longer seemed so strange. Should he do this now? Setting his thoughts aside for now, they only took an instant, he said calmly to Bonnie. Bonnie, I believe you. She frowned, confused. Believe in what? In what you saw. He stared at her with an indifferent expression, and in what your grandmother said. You're not just someone sensitive. You're a medium, or, to be more precise, a witch. Bonnie's eyes widened. Witch, she repeated, as if testing the word in her mouth. Then she let out a short, nervous laugh. My God, that was the term. That's exactly how Grandma talked about it, and I just forgot, I ignored it. Ryan smiled faintly, not that provocative smile, but something calmer, almost comforting. Come with me. He extended his hand. I want to show you something. Bonnie hesitated, for just a second, then she placed her hand in his. The contact made her face heat up immediately, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol, but the smile on her lips was hard to hide. She let herself be guided as the two of them walked away from the bonfire, the loud music, and the laughter. The orange light grew distant, swallowed by the darkness of the woods. Ryan, she murmured as they walked. Where are we going? A little deeper. Ryan replied naturally. Relax, I'm not going to kidnap you. That wasn't reassuring, she retorted, but didn't let go of his hand. As they advanced, the sound of the party disappeared almost completely. All that remained was the rustling of leaves under their feet and the distant chirping of insects. Ryan started speaking, as if he were recounting something mundane. My parents used to say similar things to me when I was younger. He commented, about us being descendants of a powerful shaman from Japan's Heian era. Bonnie looked at him, intrigued. And that has to do with them going back to Japan at that time? Yes, he nodded. They wanted me to follow the family tradition. She was about to ask what he meant by that when Ryan stopped suddenly. He released her hand carefully and took 2 steps forward. Before them stood several ancient trees, thick trunks, exposed roots. Ryan raised 2 fingers. The gesture was simple, precise. Bonnie blinked, and she simply couldn't believe what happened next. An invisible cut sliced through the air with a dry sound, almost like a snap. 3 trees were struck at the same time. The trunks split at clean, perfect angles, and for a moment nothing happened, until the treetops began to topple slowly, leaves and branches crashing with a muffled thud against the forest floor. Bonnie brought her hands to her mouth. What? Her voice faltered. Ryan, what was that? He frowned slightly, looking at the result. I tried to cut just one. Seems like I need to adjust my energy output. His words somehow explained what had happened. Was that him who did it? Bonnie took a step back, her heart pounding, her eyes darting from the fallen trees back to him. You did that. Without touching, without anything. Her breath was short. That's not possible. Ryan turned to her then, completely serious. It is possible, he said, and your grandmother was right. Bonnie shook her head, in instinctive denial. No, she let out a trembling laugh. This is some kind of trick. Illusion. I must be too drunk. Bonnie, Ryan interrupted her gently. You felt it when you touched me. You saw things. That wasn't alcohol. Why do you think I showed such interest? Elena doesn't know about this side of the world, so it's natural that she reacted that way, but I didn't. Didn't find it the least bit strange. Bonnie swallowed hard as she realized that. It was true. Ryan hadn't shown skepticism, nor made jokes, like Elena did. She didn't blame her best friend for not believing. After all, she herself hadn't believed at first. She only started accepting it when she felt that, upon touching Ryan's hand. Even so, her first reaction was to deny it, run from the idea, go after a drink, as if she could drown the strange sensation that insisted on lingering. But now, her world had just become strange, since she had seen with her own eyes that it was real. But what was her first love really? If I'm not going crazy or drunk, then, what are you? She asked, almost in a whisper. A jujutsu sorcerer, Ryan answered without beating around the bush. It's a different tradition, but it's still magic. And you? He took a small step forward. You are a witch. The silence that followed was heavy. Bonnie felt the ground seem unstable under her feet. Part of her wanted to run back to the light, to the bad music and to Elena. Another part wanted to know more. Needed to know more. Is this real? She asked, her eyes welling up, mixing fear and something dangerously close to excitement. Like vampires from ancient stories real. Ryan didn't answer right away. He just nodded. Bonnie brought her hand to her chest. My God, she let out a nervous, almost hysterical laugh. My grandmother wasn't crazy. I'm not crazy. No, Ryan said casually. You never were. Bonnie blinked several times, trying to process all of that. Her hands trembled slightly, and she alternated her gaze between the fallen trees and Ryan's calm face. Her heart was beating erratically, as if the whole world had turned upside down. Witch, magic, jujutsu sorcerer. It sounded like something out of an ancient book or one of the stories her grandmother told at night, those she always dismissed as folklore or the delusions of an elderly lady. But now it was real. She felt the weight of it in her chest, a mixture of terror and disbelief that left her paralyzed. Ryan watched her in silence for a moment, his face too calm for someone who had just rewritten another person's notion of reality. Then, a discreet smile appeared on his lips, not mocking, but mysterious, almost too serene. You seem pretty shaken, he commented, but you don't need to be afraid of this. These powers aren't a curse. Aren't they? Bonnie let out a nervous laugh, running her hand through her hair, because, honestly, it seems a lot like the beginning of a movie where everyone dies. Before she could take another step back, she felt the ground disappear. Ryan, the scream came out thin as he caught her in his arms with ease, as if she weighed absolutely nothing. Bonnie's eyes widened, her heart nearly jumping out of her mouth. What are you doing? She exclaimed, instinctively grabbing his shirt. Showing you that not everything in this has to be scary. Ryan replied naturally, looking down at her. But hold on tight. The warning came too late. The world simply disappeared. For Bonnie, everything turned into a blur of wind, light, and shadow. Her stomach churned, the air seemed to tear around them, and she tightened her arms around his neck even more, burying her face against his chest out of pure reflex, while instinctively closing her eyes. In less than a second, maybe less than that, everything stopped. When Bonnie opened her eyes again, the silence was the first thing that hit her. They were up high. Ryan set her down carefully, still keeping a firm hand on her waist until he was sure she wouldn't fall. Ahead of them, a waterfall cascaded from an impressive height, the water gleaming under the moonlight. The sound was strong but not deafening, and the fine mist created a silvery arc in the air. The forest stretched around them, vast and tranquil, as if that place were outside the ordinary world. Bonnie was speechless. Wow, it was all she could say, walking a few steps forward, cautious, as if afraid it would disappear if she blinked too hard. Where are we? A high point near here, Ryan replied. I like this place. Bonnie turned to him, still trying to process everything. What was that just now? She asked, vaguely pointing backward, to the nothing they had crossed. We ran. Something like that, Ryan said casually, body reinforcement through energy. Speed, strength, endurance. That's what allows me to move at supernatural speed. Bonnie blinked, surprised by his words. So let me see if I understand. She looked at him, still amazed. You cut trees with the air, run faster than anything I've ever seen, and carry me like I'm a backpack. Basically, that's the good part of being a witch. Well, technically I'm a jujutsu sorcerer. So, the correct term is sorcerer or shaman. Bonnie shook her head slowly, as if trying to organize thoughts that no longer fit inside her. The fear still existed, of course, but it was being quickly swallowed by something much stronger. Wonder. Because, despite everything sounding scary, it didn't seem so much when Ryan talked about it. There was something in the way he explained it, calm and almost casual, that made everything seem incredible. She broke into a wide, almost childlike smile, turning her gaze back to the waterfall, to the moon reflected in the water, to the world below, so small. This is amazing. Ryan arched his eyebrows slightly at her reaction. Amazing, he repeated. Yes. Bonnie turned to him suddenly, her eyes shining. I mean, I thought I was weird for feeling things no one else does, for my newly discovered, medium, powers, and suddenly you tell me all this is real. But if this is real, then what else can I do? Fly, heal people, or, I don't know, summon spirits like my grandmother talked about. Ryan laughed softly, a light sound that blended with the distant roar of the water. He shook his head, amused. Bonnie's reaction was exactly what he expected. Unlike what happened in the original story, nothing bad had arisen from her powers initially. In the original story, Bonnie got irritated and ended up setting a car on fire. Then, losing control of her own emotions more than once, Bad accidents repeated several other times, each leaving her even more desperate with the awakening of her latent powers. Now, however, everything was different. This time, she had only had a vision. And he had confirmed that all of it was real. And that made all the difference. She reacted like any other person upon discovering powers. So, he answered her question sincerely. You can probably do much more than you imagine, Bonnie. But I'm not the best guide for that. My magic is Eastern, based on cursed energy. I know the name sounds bad, but there's nothing bad about it since it comes from emotions themselves. Yours is Western, linked to elements, spirits, maybe even nature. You should talk more with your grandmother about this. She seems to know the right path to guide you. Bonnie nodded slowly, absorbing all of that. Cursed energy sounded like something terrible just by the name, but if Ryan said it wasn't so bad, she believed him. After all, if she didn't trust him, she wouldn't have accepted holding his hand and following him into the middle of the forest, right? She had known him since she was little. She knew who he was, knew his character. Ryan had always been one of the most honest people she had ever known. I'll go to her house later and talk to her then. Thanks, Ryan, I prefer knowing the truth than continuing to think I'm going crazy. Ryan smiled, this time more softly. I thought you'd say that. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. The sound of the falling water filled the space between them, constant and almost hypnotic. Bonnie sat on the rock, her legs dangling over the side, and Ryan ended up sitting next to her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. After a few seconds, Bonnie spoke. Why haven't you told anyone yet about being a witch and all that? Ryan shifted his gaze to the waterfall before answering. Because this world isn't kind to those who know too much, he said calmly. But, one day I'll tell Elena. And Caroline too. It's better that they know the supernatural exists. There aren't just witches or sorcerers, Bonnie. There's a much broader world than you can imagine. Bonnie frowned, tilting her head slightly as she processed his words. The wind blew gently up there, carrying the damp smell of the waterfall, but she barely noticed. Her mind was spinning around that final phrase, as if it were a door opening to an unknown abyss. What did you mean by that? She asked, her voice low, almost cautious. A broader world. Like, what? More witches, or, I don't know, fairies, werewolves. Ryan looked at her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then, instead of answering directly, he asked a question that caught her by surprise. Bonnie, do you remember those animal attacks that happened here in Mystic Falls? The ones the police said were coyotes or something, but that left the victims completely drained of blood. She blinked, confused by the change of subject. Yes, of course, everyone talked about it. It was horrible. Caroline's mom even investigated, but they found nothing. Why? Ryan leaned forward a bit, his eyes fixed on hers, serious. They weren't animals, Bonnie. They were vampires. The world seemed to stop for a second. Bonnie's eyes widened, her heart raced again, but this time it wasn't excitement, it was pure shock. She instinctively recoiled on the rock, as if his words were a physical threat. Vampires, she repeated, her voice trembling. Like, real ones. Blood drinkers, immortals, horror movie stuff. You're kidding, right? It has to be a joke. But his face remained impassive, without a trace of humor. It's not a joke. They are real. That's why I said the world is bigger. Witches like you, sorcerers like me, and creatures like them. Bonnie brought her hands to her face, trying to absorb that. Her stomach churned, and for a moment, she felt like she was going to vomit. My God, vampires. You mean those victims were their fault? How? How is this possible? What are they? How do they work? Is it like in the movies? Ryan sighed lightly, as if explaining something everyday, but kept his voice calm so as not to scare her more. All right, I'll tell you what I know. Vampires are basically undead. They die with vampire blood in their system and come back. They have to drink blood for the transition. When they do that, they become vampires. They need human blood to survive. It's what keeps them strong, immortal, with super strength, speed, and fast healing. Without blood, they weaken and turn into mummies. He paused, letting her absorb it. Bonnie nodded slowly, her eyes still wide. They have emotions much more intense than a normal person. He continued casually. Everything is amplified. Love, anger, jealousy, it can drive them crazy if they don't control it. They can hypnotize people through their eyes, they call it compulsion. They make you forget things, obey orders, anything. But it doesn't work on witches like you, or on me. And it also doesn't work if the person has verbena. Verbena, she asked, frowning. It's an herb. If you're holding some of it, or wearing it in a bracelet, necklace, or even drinking it every day as tea, it blocks the compulsion. And more, if a vampire drinks blood from someone who has verbena in their system, they get weak, poisoned. It gives a normal human time to kill them, with a wooden stake in the heart, or wooden bullet. Decapitation works too, or fire, but the heart is the main weak point. Bonnie swallowed hard, imagining horrible scenes. And the sun. They burn in the sun, right? Yes, they can't walk in daylight without protection. They need a ring, bracelet, or necklace enchanted by a witch for that to be possible. Without it, the sun kills them in moments. And another important thing, they can't enter your house without being invited. It's an ancient rule of magic, a living human's house is protected against them, unless you say, "Come in," or something like that. She shook her head, the shock giving way to a mixture of fascination and terror. This is insane, but if vampires existed, shouldn't people know about them? How do they hide? Compulsion helps with that, Ryan said, with a somber tone. They erase memories, manipulate people. But not all are monsters, some try to live normal. But the ones who attacked are dangerous. It's our duty as witch and sorcerer to protect the people who matter to us. He would protect Elena, not out of altruism or emotional attachment, but because, in some inconvenient way, she had become important to him, something curious, almost irritating, for someone who had never truly cared about anyone. As for Caroline and Bonnie, the logic was even simpler. He would do the same for them because he wanted them for himself. They were goals not yet achieved, and he didn't have the habit of abandoning something he considered his before finishing what he had started. Before anyone finds Ryan too unpleasant, it's important to remember one thing. He is technically a manipulative sociopath, someone who, at the beginning, only cares about himself. That is exactly the challenge I set for myself when writing this story, not to change him abruptly or artificially, but to develop him slowly, in a gradual, coherent, and believable way. As for his relationship with the girls, don't expect exaggerated or melodramatic drama. The idea is to have only a small initial conflict, something more restrained, precisely to keep the tone realistic and well-developed. Before he starts dating all three of them, it was necessary for there to be an, let's say, embarrassing past between them. That background isn't there by accident. It was the way I found to make this dynamic more realistically acceptable within the narrative, avoiding anything that feels forced or too convenient. Nothing here happens out of nowhere. Relationships, feelings, and even changes in behavior come with weight, discomfort, and consequences, just like in real life. I hope you enjoy the direction the story is going. Thank you for reading. Chapter 26. I don't care. If someone had told her, one day before, that she was a witch, she would have laughed. She would have laughed the same way she laughed and didn't take it seriously when her grandmother spoke about her descent linked to the witches of Salem and mentioned that she also possessed a kind of mediumship. To her, that had always sounded like ancient stories, family traditions mixed with superstition. Nothing that belonged to the real world. That started to become less easy to ignore when, upon touching someone, she really saw something. A sudden sensation, diffuse images, emotions that weren't hers. At the time, she attributed it all to the drink, to tiredness, to any logical explanation that could push away the discomfort. Still, something inside her insisted that there was something wrong or perhaps, too right to be a coincidence. Everything changed for good when she discovered that her childhood best friend and, if she was honest with herself, her first love, was a sorcerer. If it had been just talk, she would have dismissed it as a joke. Ryan had always had that provocative way. But he didn't just talk, he showed. More than once. And there were no tricks, no staging. It was real, frighteningly real, and she was the only one who knew. Part of her felt strangely relieved. Another part remained in shock. The idea that there was an entire world beyond the one she knew made her mind spin. Still, when Ryan talked about magic, nothing seemed wrong. On the contrary, for the first time, she didn't feel broken, nor different in a negative way. Maybe she wasn't going crazy. Maybe there had never been anything wrong with her. She was a witch. Accepting that, however, brought feelings too confusing to be named. And then everything crumbled. Witches were already too much to process, but vampires, people who fed on blood, creatures that walked among humans. The idea that those she loved could be in danger made a chill settle in her chest. Curiously, she didn't doubt Ryan for a moment. If witches and sorcerers existed, why not vampires? Besides, Ryan would never lie to her. Never. And that, somehow, was the scariest part of it all. As Caroline would say, she was freaking out about this internally. Bonnie blinked several times, her face pale under the moonlight, as she tried to process the avalanche of information. Vampires. In Mystic Falls. Killing people she knew, or at least heard about. Her thoughts immediately flew to the most important people in her life. Caroline. Elena, she murmured, her voice trembling with worry. They don't know anything about this. What if one of those vampires attacks them? They're so normal. They don't have powers like us. My God, Ryan, what do we do? Ryan nodded, understanding her panic. He approached a little closer and placed his hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture, but firm enough to convey security and help her calm down. She was clearly kind of freaking out, facing the truth about that world. After all, it was very different to discover that she possessed powers. Knowing that creatures like vampires, which until a few minutes ago were nothing more than myths, really existed, and that there was a concrete possibility of the people she loved being killed by them, brought a much deeper and overwhelming feeling. An almost inevitable despair. I've already thought about that. After thinking for a moment, he said calmly, I'll give each of them a necklace or a bracelet. As a gift that I mentioned that night at the grill, but with verbena embedded. It'll seem like just a pretty accessory, but it'll protect them from compulsion. It's the best way to keep them safe without revealing everything at once. Bonnie frowned, an unexpected pang of jealousy rising in her chest. Gifts for Elena and Caroline. Necklaces and bracelets. The idea of him thinking about such personal gifts for the two of them bothered her more than she cared to admit. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and she crossed her arms, trying to disguise it. Gifts? For them? She asked, her tone a bit sharper than intended. Like jewelry with verbena. That seems too romantic for a protection gift. Ryan arched an eyebrow, noticing the subtle change in her tone. Bonnie, he began, amused. Are you jealous? Bonnie huffed. It's not jealousy, she replied too quickly. Ryan rolled his eyes and decided to be a bit bold in his response. You know you don't need to be jealous, after all. I've always been in love with you three. Bonnie went completely still. His words echoed louder than the sound of the waterfall. What? She asked slowly, turning her face to stare at him directly. The previous glow of excitement had been replaced by something more complex. You have always been in love with us three. Ryan didn't look away. Yes, I believe that was already obvious that night. Even after years, I still consider that important and see you three as my women. Although that sounded a bit asshole or possessive, it's just a way of saying what I feel for you. The response came simple, direct, for you, for Elena, and for Caroline. The silence that followed was heavy, too dense to be comfortable. Bonnie felt her stomach churn, not from fear this time, but from confusion. One part of her wanted to laugh nervously knowing that her first love was still in love with her, another wanted to get angry because it wasn't just for her, and a third, a dangerously large third part felt her heart race. Despite all the confusing feelings that awakened, all she wanted at that moment was to kiss him, close the distance between them and surrender to what she felt. Part of her believed that that instant should have been theirs, especially that night, even if he seemed involved with Caroline or Elena. Still, there was a heartwarming discomfort. Accepting that he could harbor feelings for her and, at the same time, for her friends, sounded too strange to simply swallow without questioning. Sharing someone you love wasn't common, maybe it had been in other times, but today the culture was different. And, as much as her heart wanted to move forward, reason still hesitated. Even if she didn't care so much about the idea of exclusivity, as she had thought before, in the sense of knowing she would never have it while Elena and Caroline were also interested in Ryan, that didn't mean she was really prepared for a relationship where she would be part of a boys' harem. Theory was one thing, practice, quite another. Still, in a strangely contradictory way, the idea didn't repel her completely. She didn't feel comfortable, but she also didn't feel capable of rejecting it outright. Thinking about it was easy. Facing reality would be much more complicated. If he had said he loved her, she wouldn't have hesitated for a second to throw herself into his arms, kiss him, and confess everything she felt. But it wasn't just for her that he harbored feelings. Faced with that, what took over her chest wasn't certainty, but a tangle of contradictory emotions, too confusing to be organized. Ryan, she took a deep breath, laughing nervously, and saying, That's a lot to throw at me in one night. First I'm a witch, then vampires exist, and now you drop this like you're talking about the weather. I know, he said, without haste. But I don't like lying, and even less pretending I don't feel what I feel. So, let's take this step now. With his words, the air between them changed subtly. The sound of the waterfall seemed to fade away, the wind became gentler, and the proximity of the two, sitting side by side on the rock, suddenly became electric. Bonnie felt her heart race again, not from the fear of vampires, but from something much more intimate. His eyes, green and intense, locked onto hers. She blinked, surprised, when he approached slowly, his face filling almost her entire field of vision. 1,000 thoughts collided in her mind like a whirlwind, a pure emotional conflict, chaotic, made of desire, guilt, excitement, and doubt. Part of her screamed to stop, to question all of that. How could he say he was in love with the three and still look at her that way, as if the world boiled down to the two of them? Was it selfishness? Was it wrong? Or just a raw honesty too much, for which she wasn't prepared? The memory of that night came to mind, along with everything that changed after Ryan left for Japan. Years had passed, but her feelings never truly disappeared. Now, with vampires and magic involved, everything seemed even more complicated. Sharing him with Elena and Caroline wasn't what she wanted, but what if it was the only possible way? Then, a clearer thought imposed itself. Their secret, only the two of them knew about the magic, she, a witch, he, a jujutsu sorcerer. No one else, not Elena, not Caroline. That was just theirs, a unique connection that went beyond childhood friendship. If they got together, they could keep that secret too, at least for now. They didn't need to reveal everything at once. The temptation to live that in silence, away from others' eyes, was too strong. It was risky, yes, but also strangely engaging. As if it made them accomplices in something forbidden, something no one else would be able to understand. And, in that suspended instant, before any doubt could turn into words, the world around seemed to hold its breath. Before she could process, Ryan leaned forward, capturing her lips in an unexpected but inevitable kiss. The kiss started soft, his lips finding hers with a gentleness that contrasted with the strength Bonnie knew he possessed. She froze for a fraction of a second, surprised, her heart racing from a whirlwind of emotions. Still, as it was something she had desired for a long time, she ended up responding. Her eyes closed slowly while her hands rose to his neck, the instinctive gesture, loaded with trust and surrender. Ryan deepened the kiss, one hand sliding to the nape of her neck, tilting her head for better access, while the other gently guided her backward, laying her on the smooth, cold rock below them. He positioned himself on top, his body covering hers without crushing her, but with a dominant presence that made her feel protected and desired at the same time. Her breasts pressed against his firm chest, the contact sending waves of heat through her body, the thin fabric of their clothes not being enough of a barrier to hide the sensation. Bonnie arched her back slightly, a low moan escaping her parted lips as his tongue explored hers, slow and possessive. Ryan shifted position slightly, staying half on his side so as not to put all his weight on her, and his free hand descended along the curve of her waist to her butt, squeezing firmly, his fingers digging into the soft flesh through the jeans she wore, pulling her closer in a gesture that was both urgent and controlled. The kiss intensified, the residual taste of alcohol mixed with his, the heat of their bodies contrasting with the cool night air. Bonnie felt every muscle of his tensed, his heart beating hard against hers, and for a moment, the supernatural world, vampires, witches, everything, disappeared, leaving just the two of them. Ryan pulled away slowly, his lips still brushing hers, his breath hot against her skin. Bonnie, Elena and I have already been together and... Bonnie didn't let him finish. There was a fire in her gaze, a clear mix of jealousy and desire, when she interrupted him, whispering, "I don't care." Her voice came out hoarse, firm, loaded with decision. Before he could react, she pulled him back to her and kissed him again, this time with more intensity. Her lips sought his without hesitation, while her hands tangled in his hair, as if she wanted to claim that instant, that feeling, just for them. Ryan responded with equal fervor, the kiss becoming a dance of tongues and ragged breaths, while his hands explored her body with a mix of reverence and urgency. He loved that, the sweet and slightly salty taste of her lips, soft and full, contrasting with the smooth brown skin of her face, illuminated by the moon. Bonnie was beautiful, with her dark curly hair falling in waves around her face, her deep brown eyes now half-closed in ecstasy. Her body was a sight, curvy and athletic that made her irresistible. He trailed kisses down to her neck, nibbling lightly at the sensitive skin there, feeling the accelerated pulse under his lips, the subtle scent of vanilla and flowers emanating from her mixing with the humid air of the waterfall. His hands didn't stay still. One of them went up under her blouse, tracing the curve of her slim waist before reaching her breasts, firm and rounded, perfectly proportioned to her slender body. He squeezed them gently, feeling the softness of the flesh under the lace bra, the nipples hardening under his touch through the fabric, sending shivers through her entire body. Bonnie moaned softly, arching against him, the contact making waves of pleasure radiate from her chest, hot and electric, as if every nerve was alive. Meanwhile, Ryan's other hand remained on her butt. Ah, that wonderful butt, round and perky, with curves that seemed sculpted, firm enough to fit perfectly in his palms, but soft to the touch, inviting a stronger squeeze. He massaged it slowly, his fingers sinking into the flesh through the tight jeans, feeling the perfect shape that molded to her body, a sensation that left him even more aroused, her heat spreading through his hands like fire. Bonnie didn't lag behind. She loved exploring his body too, her hands descending along his broad back, tracing the defined muscles under his shirt, feeling the rigidity of his shoulders and chest, sculpted by years of training, probably from those jujutsu powers he mentioned. Her fingers dug into his biceps, strong and prominent, as if made of steel covered by hot skin, and she squeezed them with delight, marveling at the sensation of power and protection that emanated from him. Each touch made her feel safe, desired, the contrast between his strength and the gentleness of the kiss leaving her breathless. She grazed her nails lightly on his nape, pulling him closer, their bodies intertwining in an instinctive rhythm, the heat growing between them like a flame. But, unfortunately, the moment couldn't last forever. Ryan was the first to pull away, panting, his lips swollen and eyes full of desire. He looked at her, still on top, and murmured with a hoarse voice, "Bonnie, we can't go too far here. The party's down there, and this deserves a better place." Bonnie blinked, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her cheeks flushed. She nodded slowly, still dazed by the whirlwind of sensations, but knowing he was right. Yeah, you're right. But this doesn't end here, right?" She craved much more. That addictive kiss, those hands exploring her body. She wanted to go all the way with her, first love. Her mind was consumed by desire, to the point of not even considering that what she had done was wrong. After all, Ryan was with Elena. He smiled, helping her sit up, his arms still around her waist. "No, we'll finish this later, okay?" Chapter 27. I messed up. 20 minutes passed without Elena noticing exactly when. The bonfire no longer seemed as hot as before, or perhaps it was just the restlessness that prevented her from relaxing. The cup in her hand was almost empty, but she didn't remember drinking much. Her eyes, however, automatically searched among the familiar faces whenever someone passed between the trees. Ryan still hadn't returned. Bonnie neither. She tried not to think too much about it. She told herself that Bonnie had probably overdone it a bit, that Ryan was just being himself, too attentive, too protective, the type who didn't know how to simply let it go. Still, something bothered her. Bonnie hadn't left just to get more drinks. She had left fleeing, and that wasn't normal even for her. Elena rubbed her arms, more out of nervousness than cold. "You've had that face since I arrived." The voice came from her left, too cheerful for the turmoil Elena was facing inside. Caroline Forbes appeared with a new cup in hand, impeccably put together. She wore a light jacket, fitted to her body, probably chosen more for style than necessity, with the sleeves rolled up in a calculated way. Underneath, a light fabric blouse in a pastel tone, too clean for someone in an uneven field, made it clear she had thought about that look. The high-waisted shorts contrasted with the dirt and dry leaves on the ground, and the short boots, though practical, still seemed too new for that environment. Her blonde hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, not a strand out of place, as if the bonfire smoke had simply decided to spare her. She had arrived a few minutes after Ryan went after Bonnie and, as expected, went straight to her, and the two spent a good time talking, as always, before the blonde went in search of a drink. "What face?" Elena asked, without taking her eyes off the crowd. "This one." Caroline pointed to her own face, exaggerating the expression. "The face of, something's wrong, but I'm going to pretend it's not." Elena finally looked at her. "I'm not pretending." "See," Caroline smiled, satisfied with herself, before sitting on the log next to her. "Oh, I forgot to ask before, but where's Ryan? I thought you two would come together. The question came too direct to be casual. Yes, we did. He went to check on Bonnie. Elena replied, straightening her body and saying, and to get more drinks. Caroline arched an eyebrow, interested. Bonnie disappeared. She wasn't feeling very well. Elena chose her words carefully. Ryan thought it best to go after her. Caroline gave a half smile, twirling the cup between her fingers. Of course he did. There was something in that tone that Elena knew well. Caroline had always been too transparent when it came to feelings, especially those involving Ryan. She took a deep breath, deciding not to go into that territory. And you? Elena changed the subject. Where were you? You took a while for someone who just went to get a drink. I was observing. Caroline replied promptly. My specialty. Observing what? Who? Caroline tilted her head in the vague direction of the forest where Stefan had disappeared earlier. The new guy. Elena felt a slight tightness in her stomach, a mix of tiredness and irony. Stefan, himself. Caroline opened an almost theatrical smile. Elena, do you have any idea how unfair it is for a guy like that to show up out of nowhere and look right at you? I didn't do anything, Elena replied immediately. You always say that. Caroline rolled her eyes. He's gorgeous, mysterious, polite, and clearly interested. It's practically a complete package. Elena let out a short, humorless laugh. Yes, lucky me. Caroline frowned. That was sarcasm, a bit, Elena admitted, turning back to look at the bonfire. I'm just not in the headspace for this right now. Because of Ryan, Caroline concluded, without needing to ask. Elena didn't respond right away. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know exactly what to say. He's taking a while, Elena said, finally, honestly. And Bonnie left acting strange. This whole thing was strange. Caroline observed her face for a few seconds, her smile fading. Wait, is Bonnie really okay? I hope so. Well, she's been different since Ryan came back, Caroline commented, in a lower tone than usual. I mean, all of us, right? But her especially. Elena nodded slowly. She knew that, she felt that, and deep down, she was afraid of what that meant. I just wish he'd come back soon. Elena murmured, almost to herself. Caroline rested her elbow on her knee, leaning a little closer. Relax, she said, trying to sound light. If there's one thing Ryan doesn't do, it's abandon someone when they need him. That's kind of his problem. Elena smiled faintly, despite everything. It is. The two stayed silent for a few moments, watching the flames rise and fall, while the music changed once again in the background. A few more minutes passed before Elena noticed movement between the trees. First it was the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, then muffled voices. She raised her head almost at the same instant Ryan emerged from the edge of the clearing, accompanied by Bonnie. The relief was immediate, though brief. Ryan walked naturally, holding 2 cups of drinks, his posture too relaxed for someone who had left 2 worried people behind. The fire illuminated his face as he approached, and Elena noticed the apology before he even opened his mouth. Sorry for the delay. He extended one of the cups to her, the gesture automatic, intimate. We ended up getting tangled up. Elena accepted the drink, her fingers touching his for an instant too quick to be considered an accident, not that it mattered. It's fine, she replied, trying to sound casual. I was starting to think you'd gotten lost. Ryan smiled faintly, that easy smile that always made people comfortable around him. Almost that. Before Elena could say anything else, Caroline ended up interrupting upon realizing she had been ignored, crossing her arms in a theatrical manner. Look who decided to reappear. The tone was playful, but there was too much curiosity there to be just a joke. I should have taken a chair into the forest, because you took forever. Ryan turned his face to her and smiled immediately. Hey, good evening to you too, Caroline. Caroline returned the greeting with a wide smile. Good evening nothing. She raised an eyebrow. Now you're going to explain why you disappeared with Bonnie for almost half an hour. Bonnie, who had stopped a step behind him, unlike usual, she didn't look directly at Elena or Caroline. Her face was calm, but there was something restrained there, an excessive care in keeping her shoulders relaxed, her hands too busy to seem natural. We ended up talking a lot, Bonnie said, finally, and helping someone who wasn't feeling very well. She smiled, but it was a small, contained smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. Caroline tilted her head, evaluating the two with a gaze too attentive. Helping someone, she repeated, slowly, of course. Ryan laughed faintly, trying to break the tension. Yes, nothing conspiratorial. He raised his cup. Just too much talking and too little drinking. Uzu. Caroline decided to let it go, if you say so. Elena tilted her head and looked at Bonnie. She had the feeling that something was strange, and ended up observing her closely. Are you better? She asked, sincerely. I am, Bonnie replied too quickly. I just needed some time. Ryan sat on the log next to Elena, as if nothing had happened, as if that was exactly where he should have been from the start. While Elena and Caroline talked with Ryan, making banal comments about the music and the drinks, Bonnie remained silent, slightly apart. Her thoughts formed a contained whirlwind, spinning too fast for her to organize them. She avoided looking at Elena, not out of fear, but out of guilt. The realization of what had happened in the woods finally started to sink in. She and Ryan had shared a deeply intimate and impulsive moment, right after she discovered that her powers were real, that she was, in fact, a witch. At that instant, everything seemed too intense to be questioned. Now, however, consciousness hit hard, and she realized how much she had let herself be carried away by emotion, by the impact of seeing her first love suddenly approach, breaking years of distance, taking her lips in a kiss that made her melt completely. Of being pressed against the cold rock while his large hands explored her body, leaving her completely out of herself, consumed by arousal. That's why, at that moment, it didn't matter what he had said about being with Elena. She simply didn't care about any of that, even knowing that, technically, it could be considered a betrayal. But, despite everything that could be considered a kind of betrayal to her friend, she believed that Elena would end up forgiving her. After all, Elena knew very well the feelings she had always had for Ryan. Maybe that's why she didn't feel exactly regret, just guilt. An uncomfortable, silent guilt, but not paralyzing. And it wasn't as if she had completely lost herself in that situation. While they were returning from the woods, Ryan explained that he and Elena hadn't assumed any official relationship, they had only been together the night before, which considerably lessened the weight that was now starting to fall on her conscience. He also said he intended to talk to Elena about all that, which immediately put her in a panic, making her ask him to wait a little longer. Then, Ryan said he wanted the four of them to be a happy family. The idea left her deeply strange. Sharing the same man and imagining a kind of family alongside her own friends was something uncomfortable, too weird to be digested easily. No matter how much time passed, that idea remained strange, but, in an equally disturbing way, it also wasn't completely repulsive. After all, the four had grown up together. There was that night when, basically, they did almost everything and, after that, any possibility of a normal relationship seemed too distant. Faced with that, the idea of all being together, as confusing and unconventional as it was, seemed strangely easier to accept. To help, Ryan had been honest. Cruelly honest, perhaps. He had said he was in love with the three. Not as an excuse, not as provocation. As a fact, if he was an asshole for wanting the three, then maybe she was an idiot for accepting that truth. Or maybe the world simply wasn't as simple as it should be. Bonnie closed her fingers around her own cup, feeling the cold of the glass against her skin. She loved him, and, at that moment, admitting that to herself seemed scarier than anything she had learned that night about witches, vampires, or secrets. Ryan cast a quick glance at Bonnie, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her raise her face by reflex. Their eyes met for a second. There was no smile, no words. Just a silent understanding, too heavy to be shared there. Bonnie looked away first. Elena noticed the tension, even without fully understanding its origin. There was something different between the two, something that hadn't existed before that night. She brought the cup to her lips, trying to push away the uncomfortable feeling. Meanwhile, in the woods near the party, Vicky and Tyler were leaning against an ancient tree, the rough trunk pressing against her back as he cornered her with his body. The air was humid, laden with the smell of wet earth and distant bonfire smoke, and the muffled sound of music echoed like a hum in the background. Tyler, with his face flushed from alcohol and desire, kissed Vicky urgently, his lips descending along her neck, nibbling the exposed skin possessively, his hands already sliding up under her blouse. Vicky stopped him, placing her hands on his chest and pushing lightly. "No, Ty, I'm not going to have sex leaning against a tree." Tyler paused for a second, but didn't back away, his hot breath against her collarbone. He laughed softly, as if it were a joke. "Oh, come on, it would be hot." Vicky pushed him harder this time, creating space between them. For who? No, this isn't happening. It's not happening, not here, not like this. But Tyler didn't listen to her, ignoring the firm tone in her voice. He advanced again, his hands grabbing her waist insistently, pulling her close as he tried to kiss her once more. Vicky resisted, turning her face and pushing his shoulders. No, I said no, I said no, ow, that hurts. It was at that moment that Jeremy emerged from the shadows of the nearby trees, his face serious and fists clenched. He had wandered away from the party to smoke or simply to be alone, but the sound of the argument drew him. Hey, leave her alone. Tyler turned to him, his eyes narrowed in anger, his body still too close to Vicky. You know, you're starting to annoy me, Gilbert. Vicky took the opportunity to push Tyler harder, creating distance. Go away, Tyler, get out of here. Tyler hesitated, looking at her with a mix of frustration and disbelief, upset at being denied like that. He huffed, adjusting his jacket as if trying to regain composure. Wow, Vicky Donovan said no, it's a first, and with that, he turned his back and walked away, disappearing between the trees toward the party, murmuring something inaudible to himself. Vicky straightened her blouse, her chest rising and falling rapidly, and turned her gaze to Jeremy, her eyes shining with a mix of irritation and wounded pride. I didn't need your help, Jeremy replied with sarcasm, crossing his arms and tilting his head. Yeah, seems like it, Vicky frowned, defending Tyler almost by instinct. He was just drunk. Jeremy rolled his eyes, his tone laden with disbelief. I'm drunk, am I throwing myself at you? Vicky stared at him for a second, then replied rudely, her words coming out sharp as blades. No, you're worse. You want to talk to me, get to know me, see into my soul and fuck until you're sick of me. Jeremy blinked, hurt, his face contorting into an expression of genuine pain. Is that what you think? Vicky didn't back down, her lips pressed into a thin line. That's what I know, and, without another word, she turned her back and left there, her quick steps echoing on the dry leaves, leaving Jeremy alone in the dark of the woods. Back at the clearing, the atmosphere gradually returned to something approaching normality. Ryan was saying something about the weather in Japan, about how he had forgotten how chaotic the parties in Mystic Falls were, while Caroline commented animatedly, interrupting here and there with exaggerated opinions about music, clothes, and people she barely knew. Elena participated when she could, laughing at the right moments, still with part of her attention fixed on Bonnie, who remained too quiet for her own standard. Bonnie nodded from time to time, let out a short comment, but always seemed a second behind, as if trapped in thoughts she didn't want to share. Ryan took a sip from his own cup and made a face. Okay, this has turned into melted ice with alcohol. He raised the cup to show, I'm going to get more drinks before someone has the brilliant idea of dancing on the table. Caroline opened an immediate smile. Hey, don't exclude me from that possibility. Ryan laughed, already standing up. Before taking the first step, however, his gaze instinctively slid toward the woods. It wasn't a distracted look. There was curiosity there, attention, something too calculated to be casual. I'll be right back, he said, in a calm tone. The three watched him walk away almost at the same time. Vicky didn't go very far before realizing she had wandered too far from the clearing. The woods seemed different in there, more closed, darker, as if the trees leaned slightly toward each other, blocking the little light coming from the moon. She slowed her pace, breathing deeply, trying to orient herself. Great, Vicky, brilliant, she murmured to herself. It was then that the fog began to appear. At first, it was just a thin veil between the trunks, almost imperceptible. In a few seconds, however, it thickened, crawling along the ground and rising slowly, cold and damp, enveloping her legs, then her waist. Vicky frowned, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Jeremy, she called, turning suddenly. Stop that. No response. She heard a snap to the right, branches breaking under a weight too careful to be the wind. Her heart raced. Jeremy, seriously, it's not funny. She took a few steps back, her eyes scanning the fog. For a second, she was sure she saw a silhouette move. Her stomach churned. If it's you, I swear. Nothing. Vicky let out a nervous sigh and shook her head, irritated with herself. Okay, enough, you're not here. She turned to continue forward, and then stopped abruptly. A man was there, a few steps away, as if he had simply appeared out of nowhere. He was tall, with a posture too relaxed for someone standing in the middle of a fog-enveloped woods. He wore a dark open jacket, black t-shirt underneath, the contrast highlighting his pale skin. His face was handsome in an almost offensive way, well-defined features, marked jaw, light eyes that seemed to reflect the available light with an attentive, predatory gleam. There was something about him that didn't fit the place, or perhaps fit too well. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow, laden with amusement. Vicky swallowed hard. Who are you? The man tilted his head slightly, as if the question was interesting. Does it matter? He replied, with a lazy, ironic tone. Because, normally, when someone meets me like this, the question is, what do you want? She took a step back, feeling the fog close in more around her. Look, I'm not in the mood. I just want to get back to the party. Of course you do. He took a step forward, reducing the distance with unsettling ease. Everyone wants to get back to the party. Then get out of the way. Her voice faltered at the end, betraying the fear that was starting to rise. His smile widened. You know, I can tell you're scared. A piece of advice from an old friend: you should really pay attention when your instinct tells you to run. Vicky frowned. What? She didn't finish the sentence. The unknown man moved too fast for her to process. In one instant, he was at a safe distance. In the next, his hand closed on her arm with enough force to make her let out a muffled scream. She tried to break free, her heart racing, panic finally taking control. Hey, let me go. Shush, he said, almost gently, approaching her ear. It'll be easier this way. Vicky tried to push him, but it was like trying to move a wall. Her arms trembled in vain, the strength simply not enough. The last thing she managed to see were the vampire's fangs, a flash of white and sharp, sinking into her neck. The pain came quick, too intense to be comprehended, and then everything began to darken. In a few seconds, her consciousness faded completely. The man was still bent over Vicky when something extremely terrifying happened. The air became heavy, dense, as if each breath required effort. The fog stopped moving for a second, didn't dissipate, didn't advance. It just hung suspended, as if the environment itself was holding its breath. The man sucking Vicky's blood froze. Not by choice. His body locked in place, the muscles too rigid to obey. A shiver ran down his spine, pure instinct, ancient and desperate. Behind him, very close. You know, a voice came from behind him, too calm, almost bored. There are more elegant ways to approach a beautiful girl. Chapter 28. When monsters meet. The vampire couldn't even move when he tried to back away. His body simply refused to respond. The pressure in the air wasn't physical, yet it was crushing, as though something invisible had positioned itself behind him and decided that, in that space, only one will matter. The predatory smile he had worn seconds earlier froze into something tense, almost irritated. He released Vicky's neck, letting her body drop gently onto the leaf-covered ground. Very slowly, the vampire turned his face. Ryan stood just a few steps away, hands in his pockets, posture far too relaxed for someone who had just interrupted an attack. The distant firelight from the clearing didn't reach that part of the woods, yet his green eyes still reflected an alert gleam, cold, calculating, curious in exactly the right measure. He recognized the aggressor instantly. Damon Salvatore. Now, why would he come all the way into this forest to interrupt the meal of a sociopathic vampire who, to make matters worse, also had a brother with a deeply rooted hero complex? To anyone who knew him even a little, the answer would seem strange at first glance. After all, there was nothing he enjoyed more than women, and just moments earlier he had been accompanied by 3 genuine beauties he fully intended to take to bed. So why abandon such a pleasant situation to confront a crawling worm? The answer was simple: he just wanted to have a little fun. Nothing seemed more pleasurable to him at that moment than crushing the pride of an arrogant vampire, toying with him before sating his own thirst, and reminding him, in the cruelest way possible, which of the two was the true predator. He had been waiting for this opportunity since the very instant he was reborn into this world. An old, patient desire, carefully cultivated over time, and then Damon simply showed up at his doorstep, like a gift delivered on a silver platter. Given that, why not take advantage? It would be an unforgivable waste to let such a chance slip away. Though, to be fair to himself, he admitted, he had come to the party already expecting this might happen. In that context, calling it destiny was perhaps too much of an exaggeration. Planning sounded far more honest. Well, Damon broke the silence, raising his eyebrows theatrically. That's bad manners, you know. Showing up like this without warning. Ryan tilted his head slightly, his gaze dropping to Vicky on the ground before returning to Damon. Funny. The voice came out calm, almost bored. I was just thinking that you're the one with zero manners, doing that kind of thing to such a fragile girl. Damon sighed as though genuinely offended and raised both hands in exaggerated surrender. Easy. He smirked sideways. You got it all wrong. That was just innocent boyfriend-girlfriend playtime. Fake blood, little scare. She's got a weak heart for that kind of thing. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Boyfriend. He flicked a quick glance at Vicky before locking eyes with Damon again. As far as I know, her boyfriend is Tyler Lockwood. For one exact second, Damon looked genuinely shocked. His mouth opened, eyes widened, and then the smile returned, exaggerated to the point of being fake. What? He placed a hand over his chest. You're telling me I'm the side piece in this story? Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. No. He took one step forward. The pressure in the air increased almost imperceptibly. I'm saying you're an idiot with terrible taste in excuses. Damon finally seemed to realize something was deeply wrong. The mocking smile flickered and fell almost immediately. He had always been the type who didn't lose his sexy composure easily. Still, something inside him truly cracked the moment the boy whose name he didn't even know took another step closer. The pressure in the air surged abruptly. It wasn't direct physical force, but something far worse, an absolute presence, a silent authority that crushed any impulse to react before it could even form. Instinct screamed at him to run. His heart, an organ he had ignored for over a century, seemed to skip a beat. Then another, and the feeling that crawled up his spine wasn't anger, excitement, or even curiosity. It was dread, pure, raw, unmistakable. He frowned, more irritated with himself than anything else. Fear, how ridiculous. He had never felt it before. Not when he was turned. Not when he killed for the first time. Not even when facing vampires far older and more dangerous than himself. And yet, the air felt too heavy to breathe. The green-eyed young man was close now. Close enough for Damon to notice details he had missed before. The absolute calm in his movements, the complete absence of haste, as though the situation required zero effort. Those green pupils weren't glowing with rage or pleasure, which, somehow, made everything even worse. They were cold, indifferent, like the eyes of a predator that had already decided the prey's fate and was merely watching out of habit, not necessity. Damon let out a low, hoarse laugh, breaking the heavy silence like someone finally accepting the joke. All right, he shook his head slowly, dark eyes regaining that familiar irritating cynicism. I admit it, that wasn't my best excuse. He took a step to the side, cracking his neck as though his own body were shaking off uncomfortable tension. The truth, his smile widened, revealing fangs already beginning to emerge. I'm a vampire, and I was feeding. Damon's gaze slid to Vicky on the ground and then back to Ryan, now loaded with pure annoyance. And I really fucking hate, when someone interrupts me right at the good part. The air around them seemed to tremble slightly as he took another step forward, this time with clear intent. The provocation had almost completely vanished, replaced by something rawer, more primal. And to make it worse, his voice dropped, venomous. You saw too much. If the council finds out I'm the vampire in the area, my return to Mystic Falls is going to be very problematic. So blame your bad luck for running into me and your courage for provoking me at the wrong fucking time. It was at the very end of the sentence that Damon moved, body coiled like a bow about to snap. He wasn't the type to back down from some random human, no matter how strange the boy seemed. With a low growl, he launched forward in a blurred rush, right hand extended like a claw, aiming straight for Ryan's chest to rip the heart out in one swift, lethal motion, the kind of strike he had perfected over decades. But before his fingers could touch the shirt, Ryan moved his arm with casual precision, catching Damon's wrist midair as though swatting an annoying fly. The grip was absolute, bones creaked under the pressure without apparent effort. Ryan's green eyes gleamed with cold amusement that made Damon's eyes widen in genuine shock, his pale face frozen in disbelief. How? The thought flashed through his mind, fast and confused, body immobilized mid-attack. Before he could pull back or counter, Ryan twisted slightly and delivered a straight kick directly into Damon's stomach. The impact rang out like muffled thunder, raw force crushing ribs and pulverizing internal organs in an explosion of blinding pain. RGH, Damon flew backward like a ragdoll, body smashing through thin trees that snapped in half with dry cracks, hurtling dozens of meters before tumbling across the damp earth, coughing up thick, dark blood, chest convulsing as he choked on his own fluids, collapsed lungs desperately fighting for air that wouldn't come, vision blurring with pure agony. KHK, KHK, HRRGHHH. The wet sound of blood being coughed up, mixed with the suffocating gurgle of lungs struggling for air, sounded like the most beautiful melody to the human boy's ears. Ryan appeared like a ghost in front of Damon, foot planted firmly on his ruined chest, pressing down with enough weight to crack more bones, but not enough to kill. He smiled slowly, genuine pleasure curling his lips, green eyes shining like those of a predator who had just found a brand new toy. No, no, no. You don't get to die from just that. Not when it's finally getting fun. You're officially obligated to be my toy and entertain me for the rest of the night, so dying right now is strictly forbidden. Damon, coughing up blood in spurts that stained the leaves around him, managed to lift his face just enough to spit out a sarcastic remark, voice hoarse and wet, but still carrying that unshakable narcissism that defined him. Ah, I know I'm pretty. But you're not my type, kid. You think you can play with me. I'm the toy that bites back, you know. Ryan laughed quietly, a simple but icy sound, and raised two fingers in a small, casual gesture. An invisible cut appeared from nowhere, slicing cleanly through the air and shearing off Damon's left ear in one precise motion. The chunk of flesh fell to the ground like discarded trash. AIIIHHHH, fuck. Damon screamed, raw and animalistic, the sound echoing through the woods. His hand flew to the side of his face as blood sprayed, blue eyes wide with shock and rage, body convulsing under the human boy's foot. You were supposed to dodge that properly, Ryan commented lightly, almost amused, as though correcting a clumsy child. The smile on his lips widened as he watched the vampire suffer, sadistic pleasure evident in his far too relaxed posture. For some reason, this was even more entertaining than he remembered. There was something profoundly satisfying about witnessing the suffering of worms destined to crawl beneath his feet. That had always been the role of the weak, convenient entertainment for someone like him. Before Damon could retort, Ryan grabbed the collar of his jacket with one hand, lifting his body as though it weighed nothing, and hurled him hard against the nearby trees. UGHK, Hearn, ah. Damon crashed into thick trunks, the impact shattering old wood in an explosion of splinters and cracks. His body ricocheted and rolled across uneven ground, more bones breaking, wounds tearing open as he spat blood and dirt, pain radiating like fire through his entire being. Ryan appeared like a ghost beside him, materializing from nowhere right where Damon lay on all fours, coughing blood and choking, one hand still pressed to the torn-off ear, face twisted in humiliated fury, blue eyes burning with pure hatred, his narcissistic ego crushed under the weight of reality, he, the immortal vampire, reduced to this by some random human. Rage bubbled, the desire for revenge boiled like poison, but his body betrayed him, too broken, too weak to stand immediately. Fuck, AAAARGHHH, you son of a bitch. Damon spat more blood while screaming, growling low as he tried to rise, but Ryan casually stepped on his hand, crushing the fingers with an audible crack, pinning him to the ground like an insect. Ryan tilted his head, the smile never leaving his face. Ready for another round, Damon snarled, forcing his shattered body to obey the sheer force of hatred. Something inside him screamed that this was impossible, no human should move like that, let alone toy with a vampire as though he were a wounded animal. Still, he attacked, vanished in a dark blue blur, reappearing at Ryan's right with claw-shaped hand aimed at his throat. Ryan simply wasn't there anymore. He appeared about 2 meters away from where he had been. Frustrated, Damon moved again, coming up behind him, spinning for a low strike. Nothing. Ryan had already taken 2 steps sideways, as though following a silent song only he could hear. Come on, Damon growled, accelerating even more, attacking in rapid sequence. Right, left, elbow, knee. Ryan moved between the blows with absurd lightness, twisting his torso, tilting his head, sliding his feet across the damp earth like he was dancing. Every attack passed centimeters away. Close enough to be humiliating. Far enough to be useless. Are you trying to hit me or waltz with me? Ryan asked, voice serene, almost affectionate. Damon released a scream of pure frustration. Shut up. He charged again, faster, more desperate, a skillful flurry of punches and claws that would have made any other vampire proud. Ryan's smile only grew wider. And then, right in the middle of one particularly furious rush, he finally decided to hit back, using a bit of boxing he had learned during his time in the military, just for fun. The first punch came like lightning, straight to the center of Damon's face. The impact was so violent his head snapped back with an audible crack. The nose exploded in blood and shattered cartilage. Naga. Before he could recover, the second punch landed, a right cross that smashed the left cheekbone. Bone gave way with a wet snap. Skin tore. Grrrraahh. But screaming didn't help. Ryan didn't stop. Third strike, a fast jab to the already swelling eye. The socket collapsed. The eyeball sank slightly, vision bursting into white-hot pain. Aiiiih. Fuck. Fourth, a left hook to the temple. The skull rattled. Blood leaked from the remaining ear. Fifth, a brutal uppercut to the chin. More teeth flew, spinning through the air like macabre confetti. Kark. Sixth, seventh, eighth, a perfect, merciless boxing combination, each blow heavier than the last. Damon's face became an unrecognizable ruin. Nose smashed, cheeks split open, lips torn, eyes nearly swollen shut, thick rivers of blood pouring down his chin and neck. He staggered, arms hanging limp, legs trembling. Ryan paused for a second, admiring his work. "Look at you," he murmured, almost tenderly. "You're a total wreck. I think you need a doctor. I hit your face so many times it's literally unrecognizable." The smile on his face as he said it was enormous. Damon tried to say something, probably another cocky remark, but only a wet, pathetic gurgle came out. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own legs, instinct finally overpowering his shattered ego. Run, or he would definitely die. He turned and ran, or tried to. It was more of a desperate, limping stagger, body screaming in protest with every step. Ryan watched for 2 seconds. Then clicked his tongue, disappointed. "Leaving already? Who gave you permission?" He raised his right hand, fingers spread. "Dismantle." There was no warning, no dramatic sound. Damon's left leg simply detached. From mid-thigh downward, flesh and bone were sliced as though an invisible blade had passed through in slow motion. The limb fell to the ground with a wet thud, still twitching reflexively. Damon faceplanted with a scream that tore through the entire night. "Ahhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhh Ryan staggered back, hands clutching the spurting stump in rhythmic gushes, his already ruined face now a mask of absolute agony, eyes wide, mouth open in a continuous, hoarse scream that grew steadily weaker. Ryan walked slowly over and stopped beside the writhing body. He tilted his head, observing the scene with genuine interest, watching Damon convulse on the ground for a few seconds, head slightly cocked like someone studying an interesting experiment. "Vampires," he commented, almost in a lecturing tone, as though giving an informal class. "You guys can regenerate from practically any kind of damage. Broken bones, destroyed organs, torn flesh. Impressive." He took another step forward, stopping right beside the severed leg still lying a few meters back. Ryan gave it a quick glance, then looked back at Damon. "That's why you're perfect for entertainment." The smile widened slightly, but there was something cold behind it. "But, if my memory isn't failing me," he tapped his chin, pretending to think. "To regenerate a lost limb, you need the actual limb. Put it back in place, and then wait for regeneration to do the rest." Ryan shook his head slowly, sighing in mock disappointment. "Unfortunately, you're not Deadpool." He let out a short, nasal laugh. "No limbs growing back on their own, no matter how badly you want it." Damon, trembling on the ground, face destroyed, contorted in pain and confusion, managed to turn his head enough to look at him. His voice came out hoarse, broken, mixed with the gurgle of blood. "Why?" He swallowed hard, chest convulsing. "Why are you doing this?" The blue eyes, even injured and swollen, still carried something between disbelief and outrage. "We don't even have beef, I don't even know you." Ryan remained silent for a moment, then smiled, but this time the smile wasn't merely cruel. It was worse. The green eyes slowly began to glow, the color shifting into a deep, metallic red, unnatural, reflecting the faint distant firelight like heated blades. He leaned forward slightly, looking down at Damon. "Beef." Ryan actually laughed now, low, relaxed, as though he'd heard a particularly good joke. "I'm not the type who needs grudges or reasons to do what I want. I value my pleasure above everything. I'm pretty selfish, you know." He spread his arms slightly in an almost casual gesture. "If I want to kill, I kill. If I want to eat, I eat. If I want to fuck, I fuck. The smile grew wider, almost satisfied. That's how I live. Damon felt a shiver that had absolutely nothing to do with physical pain. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. Nor was it twisted justice. So that was it. He was going to die simply because this human boy desired it. What kind of monster was this? The realization hit harder than any blow. Vampires without humanity were still something he could understand. They didn't care about anything or anyone and lived only for themselves, but in theory they could still be saved. There was a return. There was regret. There was a thin thread that could pull them back to something human, a switch that could bring them back. But the thing standing in front of him, a completely malevolent human who consciously enjoyed the suffering of others, had no redemption. There was no switch to flip. That cruelty wasn't a deviation, it was his essence. And that was far worse. Ryan straightened up. The red glow in his eyes pulsed once more before softening and returning to green. But, he added, as though deciding to be generous, if you really need an explanation. His gaze turned cold again. It's because you attacked me first. Damon broke with those words, because he understood that the monster in front of him would happily kill him. His body shook uncontrollably, shoulders jerking as he dragged himself a few centimeters backward, leaving a trail of blood on the earth. His breathing came in short, disordered sobs, each inhale burning like fire in his damaged lungs. Wait, the voice came out broken, high-pitched, unrecognizable. I'm sorry. He swallowed hard, spitting blood immediately after. I didn't know, I won't do it again, I swear, never again. Never. The blue eyes, once full of sarcasm and arrogance, were now wide, glassy, filled with pure panic. I'll never come near you again. Never. I'll leave Mystic Falls, I'll disappear, I'll do whatever you want. Ryan tilted his head as though listening to something curious, then frowned. He touched his chin, thoughtful. I don't know. He took one step forward. It's hard to trust someone so ugly. Damon shuddered. Ryan crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the vampire's ruined face, studying him with clinical interest. I mean, he continued, voice almost amused. Look at you. Crooked nose, missing teeth, eye practically falling out. You really think someone like that deserves trust? He let out a short, low, cruel chuckle. If I were you, I'd say anything to keep breathing too. Damon started crying. There was no more dignity, no pose, no joke. Only broken sobs and absolute despair. Please, he stammered. I don't want to die, I promise. Ryan sighed loudly, exaggeratedly, like someone bored. Then he raised two fingers into the air, as though asking for silence. Enough. The smile vanished. The moment you started begging, it got boring. Damon froze. The terror in his eyes turned into absolute understanding. There was no way out. There never had been. Ryan straightened up, the two fingers still raised, ready to finish it. That was when something struck him from the side. A hard, sudden impact. Stefan Salvatore appeared like a blur, shoulder slamming into Ryan in a desperate, vampire-powered shove filled with pure panic. Leave my brother alone. Ryan didn't move a single centimeter. The push simply died against him, like a wave crashing against a seawall. Ryan slowly turned his face toward Stefan, expression neutral, almost curious. Look who showed up. Before Stefan could react, Ryan twisted his hips and delivered a dry, direct kick straight into his abdomen. The impact was brutal. Stefan was hurled backward, flying several meters before crashing violently into the ground, rolling and coughing blood, body arching in pain as he struggled to draw air. Silence. Now both brothers lay before him. Damon, mutilated, crying, trembling. Stefan, gasping, injured, trying to force himself up. Ryan observed them for a moment, then smiled, but it wasn't a simple smile of amusement. It was interest. He walked slowly until he stood between the two, hands back in his pockets, posture relaxed, completely in control. His green eyes gleamed faintly. Things just got a lot more interesting. This chapter existed solely to show Ryan's more Sukuna-like side. The intention here was not to portray a hero, nor someone morally justifiable, but to expose, without any filter, how cruel, dominant, and predatory he can be when he decides to have fun. This is Ryan in his rawest state, someone who enjoys tormenting his enemies, who takes pleasure in crushing others' pride, and who sees suffering as entertainment whenever it suits him. As the story progresses, he will change or at least learn how to restrain this side of himself. That doesn't mean he'll become kind, nor that this facet will disappear easily. Quite the opposite. It's deeply rooted, hard to erase, and, to be completely honest, unlikely to vanish entirely. Ryan will always enjoy playing with those he considers worms. The difference is that, over time, he'll become more selective about when and with whom he unleashes that monster. At the beginning of the chapter, I deliberately wanted to evoke that Sukuna vs. Jago vibe, along with the two girls in Shibuya, that sense of absolute presence, instinctive fear, something that simply should not exist there. That's why Damon was internally scared shitless. But, as we all know, he's more arrogant than fearful, so his ego spoke louder, and the result is right there. Now, a question for you all. What do you think Ryan should do with Stefan? Finally, just to clarify something for those familiar with the Vampire Diaries. Vampires can indeed regenerate lost limbs if they reattach them, as shown when Enzo lost his hand. If the limb is not reattached, they remain permanently without it. The originals, however, are a different matter altogether. They are essentially indestructible. In his current state, Ryan wouldn't be able to do much against them, as he's still too weak in comparison. That will change. He will train, grow stronger, and when he finally meets the originals, that's when the rules of the game truly begin to change. To be continued.